in trying to think what I would talk about today, I chose a talk or a subject matter to be for a wider audience, probably a less technical talk, and hopefully one that most people can relate to. I call it the plumbing of the internet. And because all of us are familiar with the internet, hopefully this will be something instructive. I work at a very large internet service provider, AT&T, but people, they love their Facebook, they love their Google, and they hate their service providers. So I want to talk today about the plumbing of the internet and what provides those services for you, and maybe change your minds about what it takes to be a service provider and what makes up the internet. So from your perspective as consumers of the internet, what do you see? You see a web of services. You see shopping. You do your shopping on Amazon. You have financial services, whether you do your online banking. You don't have to go to the bank to deposit your check anymore. You take a picture, and it does a remote deposit. You can do your trading with your broker, send money directly to people. So many people today are doing their music and their video on the internet. My household, we haven't had subscription TV ever in our married life. And we do pretty much all our, any movies or sports, all online now. You get your news and other media outlets online. You have all the kinds of messaging that everybody loves to do. In the business settings, everybody does email, but in your personal communications, nobody even wants to do email. They all want to be instant in their communications. We have, of course, social media of all kinds of types and message boards and forums. Peer-to-peer networks like BitTorrent. We have resource networking like Uber or Airbnb. These are now where people are changing business models in entire industries through a type of peer-to-peer networking for resources. And it's completely disrupted various industries. You have Instacart, people doing your grocery shopping for you. And you have things outside these categories, all kinds of cloud services. You're storing your backups or your iPhones in the cloud. You're putting your music in the cloud. These are all the things you're familiar with. I would say many of you probably have no idea how it even happens. I've tried to explain to my family, to my wife, and she just, I don't want to hear it, she says. So I want to start off by just a couple numbers. This is so typical. People put out all kinds of numbers and comparisons about how big is the internet and the services there. Let me give some numbers here in the United States around kind of sizing numbers. There's 92 million broadband customers. Now, when I say broadband, that's the type of service you buy from, say, like from Comcast or AT&T, or here you got CenturyLink. It's your broadband service into your home. I'm not talking about business services here other than small businesses. 92 million broadband services. These are in speeds. When you buy these services, they're from, say, 10 megabits up to 100 megabits now. You got here in Provo, you have Google Fiber, and you can get gigabit service. I'm going to talk a lot about rates. Sometimes these numbers, gigabits, what's a gigabit, what's a megabit? I hope I can help communicate what some of that is later on. There are approximately 200 million smartphones in the United States. And when I talk about a smartphone, there's definitions of a smartphone as being a computing device, but I'm thinking it from being an internet-connected device that can get to services on the internet, that has data capability. There's all kinds of estimates out there about how much traffic's on the internet. Globally, some people estimate 5,000 petabytes. So that's 5 exabytes. That's 18 zeros after it. That's in a year. That's a lot of traffic. I mean, how much traffic? You could estimate that at 1 billion DVDs. Now, I wouldn't put a lot of stock in these numbers. I don't believe in myself, but I would say maybe within an order or two of magnitude, that's probably where it is today. A lot of people always like to compare the Library of Congress. There used to be a number of people would say about 10 terabytes of digital books at the Library of Congress. But the Library of Congress has a lot of digital collections. They have movies, audio. It's estimated about 3 petabytes. So you can think about the amount of traffic on the internet in a year is equal to all the digital content that's at the Library of Congress. Anyway, so big numbers, a lot going on with all those services you use on the internet. What I want to talk to today, though, are about the networks, the pipes, the plumbing that underlie these services. So got a little bit of outline here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the technology of the pipes, the capacities of these pipes, say a little bit about link topologies. I want to take a little tangent about what it means to repair some of these services, just because sometimes your service is down for half a day. You go, this is not right. This is unacceptable. How could this be out for an entire day? And so I'm going to take a little diversion to talk about what it takes to repair some things. Then we'll come back again to, I'm going to talk a little about traffic patterns, the structure of the internet, which is a network of networks. And I'll talk about content distribution networks. And I want to say, I have a few comments about the economics and the interests of the different parties that make up these networks that underlie the internet. So first, I want to talk about access. Access is the on-ramp to the internet. That's what you're buying from your ISP providers, say Comcast or CenturyLink or Google Fiber. You're getting your connection from your home to the internet service provider. And there's lots of different technologies. On your wireline side, you have historically a lot of copper technologies. These technologies are limited in the bandwidths they can support. Say from 6 megabits to 100 megabits. They only can go over a copper loop, say from 10,000 feet to 1,300 feet. They can't necessarily go very far. If you want to get 100 megabits, you're going to have to be 1,300 feet. That's not necessarily going to get you to the office of your internet service provider. So see these green boxes out in neighborhoods. These are where the modems sit for these copper lines that they build in order to shorten those loops so they can get you higher bandwidth. There are newer technologies that are being used that will be coming out this year for, say, apartment complexes that can get you up to 750 megabits at 300 feet. On the other side now, what's being built are services based on fiber, glass wires that come to your home. So you've heard of Google Fiber here in Provo. In Austin, we have Google Fiber, we have AT&T Gigapower. These are services that can put a lot more data onto a glass wire. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Typically today, the services you can get are up to a gigabit. Your cable operators use the same technology. They're usually a hybrid fiber coax plant. They have coax instead of normal fiber into your homes. But in order to improve the amount of customers they can serve and how much bandwidth, they will feed fiber out into the neighborhoods and then copper branches down to the homes. On the wireless side, well, that's what the last decade, wireless has gotten all our attention with smartphones. And we've had, of course, Wi-Fi services for a long time. The latest that's out commercially available that you get on your latest devices and on your routers of your homes is 802.11ac. In theory, it can support over a gigabit of service if you had 8 antennas and you're standing right next to the router. But in practice, it gives you around 200 megabits per second. Now, I don't really view Wi-Fi normally as an access technology. You have Wi-Fi in your home, but then you have a separate wireline service to get to your internet service provider. It's not really a wide area technology. You go to the local donut shop or McDonald's, they'll have that service, but then they'll have a different wireline service to get to the internet service provider. But in the new cellular data realm, you have much wider area access technologies. And so you're familiar with all your smartphones, the latest technologies, the 4G technology, your LTE technology. It's based on typically a 10 megahertz spectrum. The capacity on that is around 40 megabits after you take away all the overhead. You add multiple channels, you add additional 10 megahertz bands, and you can double that, quadruple that. And so there's a lot of capacity now on a given cell site for wireless technologies. And so we know when we're out and about, we got our Google Maps when we drive. Who uses a normal standalone GPS anymore? Everybody's using they're Google Maps, you're getting your social media wherever you go. That's all access technology into the internet service provider. AT&T is a large mobility provider, in addition to being a wireline provider. And so these are all the access technologies that are used to get to your internet. Let me say a little bit about wireless. Since wireless is becoming the huge growth in our industry for the internet, I want to say a little bit about wireless spectrum. So wireless spectrum is governed by the local, in a given country, some organization. Here it's the FCC. You can't just use whatever spectrum you want. This is the radio spectrum part of the electromagnetic spectrum. There's some parts that are unlicensed, so your 2.4 gigahertz. This is your cordless phones in the house, your microwaves used in that range, your routers, your Wi-Fi routers in the house, they're all in that range. That's unlicensed, meaning different people can build devices to that. It's not controlled to limit interference. But they do limit the amount of power of these devices, so they don't extend beyond your home. They may not even extend to the other side of your house when you're doing your Wi-Fi in your home. You have the 5 gigahertz range is where you also have Wi-Fi. That supports better, higher bandwidths, but it doesn't necessarily have as good a reach. In the cellular space, you have spectrum down here that's been allocated and set aside to specific cellular service providers. This is licensed spectrum, and different bands are in each city, each metropolitan area are given to different cellular providers. And other people can't use it. They can't sit there and interfere, and they can do it much higher. Well, these bands are here, and in this spectrum, what's called the WCS spectrum, they have been, over the last decade, been given, or decade and a half or so, have been auctioned by the FCC to the individual cellular providers. In 2008, there was an auction that went for $19 billion. Companies like Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, and then others, private entities and people like Dish, which everyone in the industry is trying to figure out why Dish, the satellite company, is buying up all this cellular spectrum. I think it's because they're hoping somebody's going to buy them. $19 billion, and then this WCS spectrum just a year ago concluded $45 billion. So these companies are having to pay, they issue debt to help fund this. AT&T spent $19 billion in this auction in order to get 10 megahertz spectrum across the country. And what you're buying licenses in each individual market all across the country. So in fact, the current auction that's going on is the FCC's recovered a lot of the broadcast UHF spectrum, kind of channels 29 for us older people. Channels 29 and above who know what UHF, with the whole move to digital TV, they've gotten these channels back. In fact, they had a reverse auction, about $88 billion, to get these channels back from the TV stations. And now they're having a forward auction to, right in the middle of this right now, there's been about $35 billion bid for this space here. This space is very desirable because this is the space, you complain about your cellular providers, like you get into a building, if my phone call's not working, this has a very good penetration in these frequencies down here compared to these frequencies up here. And so this auction's going on right now. And so these service providers, this is a very capital-intensive industry to be in. It takes a lot of money, and these are scarce resources. And I'm going to talk about the end about what does it mean with these scarce resources and how we build services around them. Now, access is only the on-ramp to get onto your internet service provider. And what the internet is built on is little glass wires of light that go everywhere in the world. And these glass pipes, they are interconnected with routers that switch packets between the glass wires. We find them, this is what the internet's built on. Now this is a plot of the loss, in a single mode fiber that's typically deployed by service providers. This range means you have higher loss. This is a log scale. And where you have Rayleigh scattering. This is not a place where you would want to put a laser light. Over here, you get lattice vibrations. This is a version of water molecules, hydroxyl ions, that absorbs a lot of the power from lasers. So the ideal place to put the lasers that go over these glass fibers is down in this range here. And what we can do is we can take different wavelengths of light, different colors of light, and throw them onto this single wire. We can, and it's called wavelength division multiplexing. And we can get a ton of bandwidth on these individual fibers. So you can take different lasers that are tuned to different wavelengths, and you can combine them, use prisms, you used gratings to combine these onto a fiber, and we have these systems, these muxes that will take lots of different lasers. Take, for example, we have 88 wave systems. They will stick the different colors of light onto a single glass wire. We can have 88 wavelengths, we're deploying now 100 gigabit systems. Every single one of those colors of light is carrying 100 gigabits on them. It's a lot of capacity that is being built out there. You get companies like Google. Google's not an internet service provider, but they have these huge data centers. They have about 20-some data centers around the world. They have a number here in the United States, and this is what they do between their data centers when they're doing things like replicating all those YouTube cat videos between the data centers. They have giant optical muxes that they're now doing at 100 gigabits, and in a few years we'll be doing on each color of these lights, we'll be doing 400 gigabits. So these glass wires carrying all these optical signals are all over the place. Here is from the city of Philadelphia. This is an old plot of downtown Philadelphia of the streets that have conduits carrying optical fibers. And the darker colors is where there's more fibers being laid in that city. Lots and lots of communication sitting there underneath the streets. At the regional level, this is a map from Georgia of all the different, this is an old map of over a decade produced by the state there, showing the different paths, the intercity paths, interconnections of fiber routes. Now, these fiber routes between cities typically are following your major highways. You've seen the little pylons along the road when you're driving along. You know, orange pylon, AT&T, don't dig here unless you call first. At the national level, this is a map that was created from various public resources that shows the national level intercity fiber paths. Now, these don't belong to one company. These are fiber paths that belong to many different companies. A lot of them are sharing certain paths. They're all along major interstates, and they cover the entire country. Here are the undersea cable routes that connect the entire world together. And so you got the routes on the Pacific here and on the Atlantic, huge amounts of bandwidth. In fact, a lot of your large content providers have banded together, like Google and others. They actually now, whereas traditionally they were owned by large telecom companies like AT&T, some of these, like Facebook and Google, now own some of their own. They have consortiums where they have bought undersea cable systems to provide capacity throughout the world. Here it is. Here's the undersea cable system or layouts that are in Asia and Africa. All right, so there's a lot of network pipes out there. And these pipes are built into topologies. Now, once you reach an ISP, we try to build reliable networks. And so the blue boxes here represent the routers that interconnect these fibers. And we build topologies, 2 connected topologies at least, if not higher connectedness. That has to do with resiliency. What that means is in this topology, if I was to have a single link or single node failure, for example, if I lose this link at the bottom, then traffic has another path it can route through in the network. And so these networks are always built with this kind of diversity or connectedness. Now, I want to take a little tangent here. As I mentioned earlier, I wanted to explain to you that repairing these kinds of failures is not that easy. And so when you complain about your service being down, there are things that happen, bad things happen. This is one of these aggregation nodes that sit out in the neighborhood that have the modems in it for your high-speed access from your home versus a car. It didn't turn out very well. This is the kind of thing, the diversity doesn't help because you only have your one line connection from your home to the service provider, and you're going to be out for hours. Now, they've told me they can replace these things in about 3 hours, which is amazing. But when they get the cross-connect box where all the wires come and gets wiped out by a car, they said that takes much, much, much longer to replace. This is what they call a controlled environment valve in the neighborhood. It's like a little computer data center that's built under the ground. It's right next to some tennis courts here. They had a power failure, and the batteries ran out, and there was a flood, and this thing got flooded and was wiped out. They had to bring in a trailer to replace the service on this. In Austin, we live in Austin. A little black dot over there is where we are. And back in June, we had 2 fiber cuts, dual cut, you know. You'd think that would be rare, simultaneous cuts like that, but we did have 2 fiber cuts that took out service in the northern part of Austin and service down in the southern part of Austin. That one up north, that was 144 fibers that were cut and destroyed. Down here was 288 fibers, all carrying services. Some of those had this wavelength muxing on it with tons and tons of capacity on it. It took out a lot of cellular service down here. It took out my home internet service. I went online. Our cellular service wasn't out, so I hopped on my modem on my computer, and I was able to go look at some of the sites, go look at internally to see what was going on. Plus, there's these sites that monitor publicly what's going on, and where people can go and find out, hey, there's service down. Everybody's complaining. It's been 4 hours now. It happened Friday afternoon. It's getting towards the evening. How dare AT&T, why can't they get my service up? What the heck is with that? And so it takes a while. We have all these alarms that immediately know, hey, transmission's down in this particular office, but we don't know why it's down. So they send somebody out there. He's got to drive in traffic. These offices, they're all over the place. There's those vaults like that. There aren't people sitting there. They got to drive across town. They'll take one of these optical time domain reflector instruments that they'll connect up to the fiber. Once they get there, it takes them an hour to drive over there. This technician will connect up. This thing will shoot a laser light down the fiber, and they can detect where the cut is, because there'll be a change in the index of refraction. You'll get some light power coming back, and it can tell you how far away that is. But that's far in terms of fiber. These fibers are spooled, they're wired, they don't take a straight path. So the technician gets in his car, he starts driving the route. He's looking, where the heck is this problem? He's got to find it. I mean, if it's one of these where it's aerial, above ground on a pole, well, this is pretty obvious. He's come along. You can see the thing down. But sometimes it's not so obvious. And when they get there, they find out, well, somebody's doing road construction. And they say, oh, it's probably this point. And they go and they try to find where the intrusion was. And when they get there, this isn't just taking some scissors and cutting them and splicing back a little bit and gluing it together. This is not simple. And so they'll bring in another long piece of fiber. They have to dig back the trenches. They'll put in, they'll have to do 2 splices on each side. They have a special splicing trailer that they have to bring in to splice things together. They have a special device that can, fortunately, these things with 288 fibers in them, they have ribbons of like 12 fibers each. And they can put in them a special device that will strip, clean, cut. They have to make a perfect vertical cut to the longitudinal direction of the fiber, because otherwise you will get reflected light. And then they arc fuse, essentially melt the fibers together, and then put on insulation and then put them into one of these trays. Well, that's a special trailer. They were stuck in traffic, took a long time, because after the guy finds out where it is, and there's only a couple trailers in a given city, they bring those out. It takes a couple hours to get there. They got to find it. They got to lay the new fiber, bring it out, do 2 splicing activities. Amazing that they can splice 280 fibers, and they're color-coded so they know how to match them up. By about 2 a.m., this was done. So about 2 p.m., there was a failure identified. But between trying to find the failures, locate them, and then resplice, it got done by 2 a.m. To me, that's an amazing job that they could get that done by 2 a.m. Everybody's going, where's my Facebook? I can't get to it. Why the heck did that take so long? So I want you to be a little more sympathetic to your service provider when service is down and why it might take so long to repair. Remember, your buddy down the street may have driven his truck or may have been digging his backyard and taken something up. All right, let me switch back to the topic. I want to talk about the theme of the volumes of the traffic. Now, this is a graph of the broadband services on AT&T that we offer around the country. The different colors represent different technology, older, what's called DSL technologies. These are what we call fiber to the node technologies, where we bring a fiber out closer to your neighborhood to shorten the loop length so we can get the higher bit rates I mentioned earlier. This is what we call our gigapower service. It's the fiber-based all the way to the home, similar to what Google Fiber is doing here in Provo. And these are the typical, this is the downloaded usage over the course of the month. And you can see how what I want you to get out of this is how this is going up. It looks like an exponential plot over the years. So let's look at this on a log scale. And so when we look at these technologies, they've been very predictable. This has been over 13 years. On a log scale, this looks very linear, meaning it's geometric growth year over year. So it's about 34%. In other words, what you're doing on the internet year over year, you're doing more of it, and it's growing about at 34% year over year. Now, and I did want to mention here that the downstream is what it's all about. You're just sucking traffic, and very little is going upstream. The downstream traffic is about 11 times larger, and this is going to be important, something I'm going to share later. It's about 11 times larger than the upstream. Well, if there's that much growth, I got to keep adding capacity. That's why we need these technologies like putting multiple lasers onto a given fiber. Why I have to keep growing from 10 gigabits for that laser to 40 gigabits to 100 gigabits year over year. Here's what the aggregate behavior of our broadband subscribers look on a time-of-day basis. This is done 2 years apart in 2015, 2016 in March. Oops. And what I want you to take away, this is what you would intuitively think. This is the morning hours. This is local time. Our services are spread across the country. This is prime time. So this is like 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. And so the peak here is in the middle of the day when everybody's at work. And, of course, there is a lot of business traffic. It's when everybody gets home, and now you've had your dinner, and you're sitting down to watch Netflix or something. And that's when our demands, and when we dimension our networks, it's based on these prime time demands. And you can see how this has grown over from 1 year to the next. All right, so I want to talk about the applications that are driving this. Video. Today's world, it's all about video. Video over the top is what's driving these demands. On the wireline side, 2/3 of all the internet traffic being carried is video. It's Facebook video, it's Hulu, it's YouTube, it's Netflix. 2/3 of all the internet traffic is video. On the wireless side, half of it is video. You have more stringent quotas there. You're maybe not doing as much. The sources of this traffic is Netflix. Netflix is number one. It's about 1/3 of our traffic. 1/3 of all the internet traffic on our network is Netflix. Amazing. YouTube, huge. Of course, Google has a lot of other services, but the bandwidth-intensive service is YouTube, and then Facebook. Actually, on the cellular side, Netflix is 3rd, and it's YouTube and Facebook are number 1 and 2 as the sources there. Now, to help you understand why this is important, Netflix high-definition video uses about 3 to 6 megabits per second. Your services you're buying at home are running around probably 25 megabits today. If you're doing a higher speed server, 50 megabits. You got the Google one, you got a gigabit. If you were doing music streaming, well, music streaming is a one-dimensional source compared to video, which is a two-dimensional spatial source. So there's a lot less information there. So it's about 200 to 400 kilobits per service. It's far smaller than what you're doing with your video services. So it's an order of magnitude smaller. Maybe instead of looking at it in terms of rates, we look at it in terms of size. 1 hour of Netflix HD is about 3 gigabytes. You're watching your movie program, your TV show, it lasts an hour, that's 3 gigabytes. You go to the New York Times homepage, it's got a lot of objects there, but there's only 2 megabytes that's going to be downloaded when you're going there. You're looking at photos. Well, your photos are only about 2.5 megabytes. So these are an order, this is 1,000 times smaller than what you're doing in video. So video is just dominating the current growth. I get these questions all the time from people who look at these growth trends, and they're always saying, oh, what you're predicting for growth on the internet, that's going to change. You got 4K video and ultra high definition, that's coming. That's going to change your predictions and what you need to do for capacity planning. Well, it's not. I say, well, there's got to be something. To grow 34% year over year, there's always got to be something. There's always been something new. To me, this captures that there's always something new coming. I keep wondering if it's going to stop. Are you guys going to stop watching so much video or whatever? But there's always been something new. Something new has always come along, and I don't expect this curve to jump way up. I think 34% year over year is huge for you to keep growing what you're doing. And so there's always going to be something new that comes along, and it's already kind of captured in that trend. All right, so the internet is really a network of networks. Many, many different ISPs out there. They agree to interconnect with each other. They're independent. They have different business motivations, and they agree to connect each other and exchange traffic. Some of them will connect like a free trade zone, where they agree, hey, I will exchange traffic with you. You send me traffic. As long as we're doing about the same volume, we'll be okay. But if you start dumping on me, that's it. I'm not going to take more than a certain amount. Others are more of a customer-provider relationship, where a small, like here in Utah, you got X-Mission does kind of small businesses. They're going to be using another internet service provider upstream of them, where they'll be a customer of them. You have, but this interconnection, these agreements to exchange traffic are pretty much all private. There's no highway commissioner here. There's no traffic cops, nobody to make sure that your traffic gets where you want it to go. You may complain, you may think, dang it, why is my traffic going when you want to blame your immediate internet service provider? But it may have nothing to do with them. Now, recently, the FCC, of course, I come from a service provider, I have strong feelings about this, is getting involved in trying to regulate. And in other parts in the world, the European Union and others, they're starting to get a little more involved in trying to regulate and define what the business models are for these services. Now, here's an interesting plot by the Opti project. In fact, this is a visualization of what these networks and networks look like. These individual kosh balls, you could call them, or individual ISPs. They're colored for different parts of the world. This is Asia. The blue ones are North America. The little lines in these kosh balls, these represent the address blocks that these individual ISPs own and that they exchange throughout the world. The interconnections between these kosh blocks go through what you could view as a backbone. These white lines represent ISPs that are very heavily connected. One of these versions of this particular map of the internet is actually in the Museum of Modern Art. Well, so let me talk a little about the structure that's involved in the internet. So here you have each one of these little clouds here represents an internet service provider. And they have interconnections with each other. You, as a customer, may hang off any one of these. And these represent that they have a relationship to exchange traffic. Don't mistake this to say that they only have one link. They'll have many interconnection points, and there'll be many links, many of those fibers involved there. But you can have many of these different links. I mean, there's not necessarily, look at this, you think, well, is there any organization here? What kind of organization there is? Now, it turns out that the internet is not really that constrained. It's actually constrained based on business agreements of who can exchange traffic. So, for example, for network C here to go F, he could go through A and then B, then D, down to F. But the business relationships actually restrict how the traffic can flow here. So the internet really looks like a tier structure. In the outer tier, what's commonly referred as tier 3, you have internet service providers who only connect, like the X-Mission example I mentioned earlier, who only connect to other internet service providers upstream. And they get out to the rest of the internet through that relationship. So this is a business relationship. They're paying for that. That's called transit service. They're getting to the, if this customer here needs to get to any of these other networks, he's coming through him to get to anywhere else in the world. This middle tier are ISPs that they have both a customer relationship and whether they're a provider to customers and they are customers to upper stream tiers. So this B would provide transit to the rest of the internet to D, but he doesn't need to do that for D to get to F. These red links represent peering relationships. These are networks that agree to connect to each other, but they only exchange traffic for their own customers. So at the top tier, this tier 1, there's a full mesh of interconnectivity, meaning everybody connects to everybody else. And so at this top tier, network B will exchange traffic with C only to get to C's customers that are below him in the lower tiers. He will not try to get to C by going transit through A and down to C. And so they will have a relationship where they have a contract. They'll say, we'll exchange this much traffic with each other, but only for our directed customers. You can't use me. B will tell C, you can't use me to get to A. And so you can use me to get down to E and D because they're my customers below me. So this relationship, these relationships of customer to provider and peers, often when you look at issues around congestion in the internet, it has very little to do with what's going on inside these networks and has almost everything to do with these interconnects. And how much bandwidth, how much capacity, these things are like your freeway exchanges. I meant to put a picture of Los Angeles freeways on here. And it's up to them to decide to put more capacity. Even in the customer-provider relationship, if I need more capacity for Netflix, because there's so much demand, I got so many customers who want to do Netflix, I have to decide, this is a customer provider, I have to buy more capacity from there. In fact, you'll find some of these tier 2s, they say, dang, I have so much traffic with Netflix. What they'll do is say, I'm tired of paying for that Netflix coming through my transit provider B. They talk to Netflix, and Netflix will connect directly to them. Oh, they'll put caches right on their network. Just to say, because they'll say, well, now I'm not paying money to him anymore to get that Netflix traffic down here. And what they'll do is sometimes they'll even make their own peering relationships down on these levels. And they'll say, hey, D and E, I'll exchange with you instead of going through our transit providers at the top level. So this is a plot of these networks. These little boxes represent individual ISPs. There's 39,000 of these networks, and we refer to them as autonomous systems. They even have autonomous system numbers, and they exchange the routing information around the world. The plot on the angle basis refers to longitude of where they're located around the world. The U.S. is down here in this sector of the plot. You have these small ISPs out the edge. In the middle, this plot measures, in terms of radius, is the amount of connectivity and transit connections that these internet service providers have to others. So in the middle here are your tier 1 providers with all these red interconnects that are full mesh. You find companies in the middle here, you probably can't read these. Let me go to the next one. There's companies you have never heard of, probably. Level 3, one of the biggest capacity providers here in the U.S. and globally. They are not providing service down to individual consumers. But you also have your AT&Ts here, you have Time Warner, you have Verizon and others that are here in this tier 1 level. So an ISP that needs to get from here to something over here, if you're doing peer-to-peer, he's probably got to come all the way up to this tier 1 and then back down to get the traffic through the network. And so these internet service providers exchange traffic, but it's not an unconstrained problem because they have these business agreements about who will exchange traffic for who. And CADA, where this plot comes from, they study these kinds of relationships and what it induces on and what it means in terms of the network traffic exchange in the internet. I want to say one other thing here, because that can take, you may have to go through a lot of different service providers to get different content. If you were doing a centralized network, it's hard to do this efficiently if you want to do video services. If you're just doing a little web blog, no problem. But the problem with centralized distribution, it concentrates the demand, you get high utilization right there at where the concentration is, and also gives you long latency. That refers to the amount of time that gets to the content. And so what you have are a lot of content distribution networks. These take the content and they go out and connect into different ISPs. Some of the biggest ones out there, Alumni is the biggest one in the world. They have like 160,000 servers and about, I think, 90,000 locations. They come and co-locate in individual ISPs. And so different service providers, different content providers will come and place their content here so it's closer to the end users. Now, some very large, well, here's an example, Akamai, where they go all around the world. 216,000 servers in 220 countries, serving 1,500 different ISPs to distribute that content. So I want to say something else as I finish up here, that there are different types of ISPs. There's the eyeball ISPs, these are the guys you buy service from. There are the transit ISPs, the ones that are just getting you to other networks, like the level 3s. There are some that are both, that are AT&T. There are these CDN networks, that's all they specialize in, is getting connected to everybody else's network. And then there's what I call the super content providers. They don't need the CDNs, they're so large, it's the Facebooks, the Googles, the Amazons. They are so big that they have their own gigantic data centers. They will interconnect directly to like the tier 1 ISPs. And to get the content directly out there. They don't use the CDN services. Well, they all have different motivations. They all have different objectives. I want to say a little bit about the objectives. One is in our networks, we want to get minimum cost networks. We have a guiding principle, minimum hop networks. Minimum hop just means you don't take the longest path through the network. Because each one of these hops, you go from electrical to optical, you go through routers, they cost money. And so we have initial networks. When you don't have a lot of growth, you can do a lot of aggregation, but as soon as you have a lot of growth, you want express paths. Think of the airline systems you get. When you have enough demand between a pair of cities, the airline always prefers a nonstop direct flight. Because taking off and landing consumes a lot of fuel and people. It's very costly. Whereas when you don't have enough demand, aggregation in hubs is very useful. To bring together demands from Austin, you can bring a lot of demands to Salt Lake and then spread them out to the other cities. But when you have a lot of growth, you eventually get to the point where you start doing express paths. Well, the problem is in these exchange models, we have what's called hot potato routing. I don't want to carry the traffic on my network, so ISP X says, I'm going to use link 2 in New York to go from A to B. ISP Y says, well, to go from B to A, I'm going to do the same thing. Get this off my network as fast as I can. The problem is that thing I said about download being very large, much larger than upload. Well, you get here, the eyeball network. I got 11 times more traffic coming in this way than the return traffic going back to the continent network. Well, as an ISP eyeball network, I don't like that. You're putting all the cost on my network, and you're not carrying much of that cost. So a lot of the disputes you see in the press that Netflix likes to make and complaints are around these economic differences between the networks. You also have what's called the tragedy of the commons. This is the notion that you have a common resource. It's a valuable, scarce resource. You hear about this in the climate change discussions. That if you don't put controls on it, people will just hoard and use it all and it'll be gone. Well, we have that in this traffic exchange. If you make it like, if your spectrum in the wireless cell phone is gone, everybody will just consume all the traffic. And so we have quotas on there. You have to have some notion of constraint. Now, what the right business model is for that constraint, that's up to the provider to decide. It's not up to the FCC to decide what the value is of that exchange between. These are customer to provider contracts. These exchanges are private, two-sided party contracts. The FCC is coming in and trying to say, what are the limits we can do on these contracts, trying to say what they should look like. And I just want you to keep in mind that there are different incentives that govern these agreements. And how the traffic flows on the internet it's amazing that it does work in spite of all these different networks having to cooperate together. Well, my time's out. I don't know if you had any, I don't think there's any time for questions or what?